Good evening and welcome. My name's Imani Rupert Gordon, and I'm the Executive Director for Affinity Community Services. Affinity is a social justice organization. We serve the entire LGBTQ plus community with an emphasis on Black LGBTQ plus women. We do our work in three intersecting priorities: health, wellness, and safety, education, and organizing, advocacy, and civic engagement. You can find us here the fourth Friday of the month. We talk about issues relating to LGBTQ people, Black people, and other folks of color, and women, and intersecting identities between any of these. So I'm very, very excited today. We are again here with Aisha Davis. You will probably recognize Aisha. Aisha has been here more than any guest on CAN TV.
Happily.
And we're happy to have you. Aisha and I just like each other a lot, and she had an amazing idea for a topic. And so Aisha is the board vice president or vice chair of Affinity's board, and we're super excited to have you, Aisha.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So today we're going to talk about a topic that we spend a lot of time on at Affinity, and that is the wage gap or the gender pay gap. People use those words interchangeably. And so before we jump right in, I want to give just a little bit of context so that our viewers are understanding what we're talking about. So when we talk about the gender pay gap, we're talking about the difference between what men and women are paid. And so this is basically determined by the annual median income or salary of all women divided by the annual median income or salary of all men. That number that you have left over, that represents how much women make to how much men make. Typically that number is, we talk about, it's around 80%, so we talk about the pay gap being about 20%. In 2018, it was actually 18.9%, so a little less than 20. But the part that we don't always consider is that that's not talking specifically about Black women, around people of color, around people that are undocumented, people with disabilities, LGBTQ people, basically anyone with an underrepresented identity is not going to be represented by that 18.9%. It's actually going to be far greater than that. And we're talking about this month because yesterday was Black Equal Pay Day. And Black Equal Pay Day means that it took until August 22nd of 2019 for Black women to get paid the same as white men got paid in 2018. And so that represents the 61 cents to the white man's dollar that Black women make, which is incredible and not in a good way. And so we're going to talk about the pay gap, the wage gap, and specifically what that means for folks. So, like I said, as many of you know, the Black Equal Pay Day was yesterday, and that represents how far along Black women had to come into 2019 to make what white men made. So this has very real consequences for Black women.
Absolutely.
And Aisha, as a Black woman, like, I know it frustrates me to hear this, so I imagine it frustrates you as well. And I'm wondering, I think a lot of people say, so what do you think about that? But I want to know specifically, what are your concerns about that when you hear that? Let's outline some of those.
Absolutely. One of the things that is extremely concerning about hearing that information is this question of what it means for our community as a whole, right? So when we're talking about Black people in general, there's often a conversation about building generational wealth within the Black community. But if we're talking about queer Black women, that is a whole different set of topics and a whole nother conversation that you have to have because the equal pay day for Black women is not the same as it is for Black men. And if you're talking about a community of mostly folks who are either cis women, trans women, or non-binary people who are often paid way less than cis folks or any binary person, it means that our community is impacted on a whole nother level that even most statistics aren't able to actually quantify. So one of the biggest concerns that I have is about what that means for us as a community of people who are facing multiple jeopardy, right? It's a question about what that means for people who are not only facing sexism, but also racism, also homophobia, also transphobia. And so one of the things that I wonder is what that will mean as generations go on. If you're trying to start a family and the two heads of household or more than two heads of household, depending on how your family structure is set up, if all of these people are affected by this pay gap, what does that mean for the next generation? Like, what does that mean for your children? What does it mean for your children's children? And in pop culture, like, you even see people talking about, like, generational wealth. I like to point to Beyonce and Jay-Z.
Well, you know.
It's the first day of Virgo season. Beyonce's a Virgo. It's applicable, right? So one of the things that comes to mind is, like, she has a line in a song where she talks about how her children's children are already wealthy. And that's wonderful for her, and it's applicable for her because capitalism has worked out in her favor.
Right.
But for the vast majority of black women, capitalism does not favor us. And it means that we have to be concerned about what that means for our families, what it means for the elders in our families as well, because a lot of things we don't talk about is how a lot of times the care for older adults falls to women. Yes. So what does that look like? So I have a number of concerns that always come up, and every time, but every time Equal Pay Day comes around, I have friends who will text me and they're like, it's so frustrating that this is still happening.
Right.
And the question is, what can we do about it? And honestly, it's a difficult answer to even try to come up with.
Yeah.
So I think that's also another concern. It's like, how do we begin to rectify a system that is harming us, but is actually not broken by the standards of those who created it?
Right. Oh, that's and that's not where I thought we were going to go with this. But I mean, that's so a few things. The first is that we have an equal pay day gap guide, a wage gap guide, an intersectional approach to the wage gap on Affinity's website, affinity95.org. If you go there, it has some more information about this, but it also has some things that you're able to do, which I'm happy to talk about at the end of this too. But yeah, you were also talking about generational wealth that I thought was really, really important because we also know that once you start making less money, that is, at your next job, it's based on your previous salary, so that's going to be more money that you're not making. Absolutely. And then these are actually compounding things. It actually, works very similar to multiple jeopardy, as a matter of fact.
Absolutely.
But yesterday I was reading that over a 40-year career, a black woman loses $946,120. So that's almost $1 million over her lifetime that she's missing because of this pay gap guide. So that's something. So what you're saying is actually it's a real concern. And so this is complicated because on one hand, you know that as a black woman, you are probably being underpaid now, will probably be underpaid in the future, but there's also this pressure to go above and beyond.
Absolutely.
And I want to know, how does this sort of paradox manifest itself for you, specifically in your relationships with people, but also in your relationships with organizations?
Absolutely. It's a thing that comes up a lot of times. I remember being in law school and talking about the different areas that folks wanted to specialize in, the things that they wanted to do when they graduated and passed the bar. And there were a lot of conversations amongst black women, especially, about trying to give back. And I think that part of it is based on the way that we socialize children that are coded as girls, and the fact that we are often taught that we have to care for people. So this caretaker mentality is kind of built into the way that we are socialized as we age. And so when you combine that with achieving a law degree, a lot of times it manifests as public interest law, which is an area that is often paid much less than corporate law, right? So folks who are very interested in going into big law, I even had a really good mentor who was the head of the career services department at Columbia Law School say to me, you really need to participate in this open interview process with these big firms. And I told her, I don't want to do that. Like, that's not what I want to do. I want to let the passion for the law and social justice guide me. Like, that's what I want to do. I don't want to work in a big firm. And she told me that that was wonderful. And it sounded nice. But that there is this wage gap that exists. Like, she actually talked to me about that. And she was like, listen, it's almost like you're doing yourself a disservice because you're going into these interview processes with the name of a high-power law school, with these accolades that go with that. So why not take advantage of it? And it got to a point where I went through the process. She convinced me to do it. My family also encouraged me to do it because I mistakenly revealed to them how much a summer associate could make at a big firm. But when I got into an interview with another black person, an older black man who was a partner at a large firm, he looked at my resume and he looked at me and he said, "Why are you here?" And it wasn't in a condescending way. It wasn't in the like, "You're not qualified, so why'd you even come to this interview?" It was more of a like, "Your resume says one thing, but you're here at this open interview process doing something that seems very counter to that. So what is it that's making you come here? And we had a very honest conversation for the 15 minutes that we had together. And it made me realize that a lot of the things that I wanted to do with the law had nothing to do with achieving money. And I think that there is this very interesting paradox that is created when you have folks who want to achieve success for a community, right? I think there are a lot of queer Black women that fall into this this category of wanting to make things better for everybody because we realize that we are hit with so many different forms of oppression. Right. And so we will bypass things that will seem to improve things for us individually to try to work for the collective success of a community. And so it means that oftentimes we are faced with this choice of, do I go for the capitalist dream or do I go for the success of my community? And it means that when you're faced with statistics about the wage gap or the gender pay gap, it's understandable how these things happen because at the end of the day, are we deciding to do things that seem or could be classified as selfish? Or are we doing things that are classified as for our community? And there's this pressure that we receive on so many different fronts about what we're doing with our educations, who we're helping out, who are our quote-unquote people, and how does that look, and how does that manifest when we're deciding on what our jobs are. So I think that the paradox exists for a number of reasons, and I hope that it can ease up for a lot of folks coming after us, but I don't know.
That's so. I mean, you said so many things that are interesting there. There's also this pressure, and there's this thought about what it looks like. You just said, is it being selfish? You know? And that's something that folks from underrepresented identities have to contend with, have to think about. But people from more privileged identities often don't have to think about
Exactly, because everyone's already set.
Right.
It doesn't fall on you. You don't feel like it's a thing that you have to do.
Right.
Yeah.
So it looks like we have a caller. Caller, go ahead.
Yes, we'd like to know who the young lady is that was just speaking, where she's from, or we don't know who's speaking, her background,
So
other than being a lawyer.
Sure. Well, she is the Affinity Board Vice President, and that is the capacity that she's in here today.
Absolutely.
But why don't you go ahead and share some of your experience?
Sure.
Where you went to school. And,
Absolutely. My name is Aisha. I am an attorney by trade. I went to law school. I have 2 different law degrees, which actually kind of tie back into what we were talking about because where you have, I have a JD, which is a non-specified or a non-specific law degree for the U.S. And then I have a Master's of Law, which is focused on human rights, conflict, and justice. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about justice and get a degree that focused on that was because I was very much interested in how to best assist my community in being more successful. I decided to go to law school in high school because, one, I was part of a mock trial program. The other thing was that I was raised in a house that had a couple different, areas of justice coming in and influencing me. My mother is an equal opportunity specialist. My grandmother was very Catholic in the you have to help your community Catholic. And so when I grew up, my whole thought about being an individual was being one of a community. You are yourself, but you are also part of a larger thing. So I'm an attorney, and I work in civil rights law. I've always worked in civil rights law, both with nonprofit and for-profit law firms. So I specialize in civil rights, and I have done so for approximately 5 years now.
Wonderful.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, caller. Aisha's a good one. We like having her around.
I know, and I got lucky to meet the folks at Affinity when I first moved to Chicago within the first week of moving here, actually.
Was that in the first week?
It was. It was.
Yeah, thrilled to have you. Thank you so much again, caller. So getting back to sort of this pressure that Black women feel, I wanted to talk to you more about this pressure to perform. It wasn't long ago that I heard on popular television show Scandal that Olivia Pope's father said, you have to work twice as hard for half as much. And that was an incredible revelation for me. Not because I hadn't heard that before, but because I'd heard it very often before. That that's something that my father had said to both my sister and me. And I thought that that was something that was unique to our experience. But after that happened, I found out that that was an experience that was universal to many, many Black families. And that was something that I thought was really, really interesting. And I want to ask, can you describe how you experienced this pressure, how you came to understand it, and then where you think that comes from?
Yeah. I actually remember my grandmother saying something very similar to me. And part of that was because my grandmother's thought process when dealing with my brother and I, we were about a year apart, so we were only 1 year of a difference in like classes in school. And whenever I finished my homework, she would then copy my brother's homework and have me do it. And when you're younger, that can be a whole different skill set that you don't even know yet. And I would tell her things like, I don't know division yet. I don't know multiplication yet. And she's like, you're smart. You can figure it out. And I would get frustrated with the process because I didn't have the teacher teach me about it. I didn't have a class that had like led to it. It was literally her putting the paper in front of me and saying, figure it out, right? And I asked her about it one time because I had gotten so frustrated about not understanding what the work was. And she told me that I have to be twice as good, that I would be expected to be twice as good to get half as much. Literally the same thing that they said on Scandal. And it stuck with me. And because she's my grandmother, I was like, okay, she's not telling me something that's wrong. Like, she's only telling me things that will make me better, will make me successful. And I really think that these phrases really come from an attempt to have our descendants excel beyond where we are. And it presents itself in so many different ways. One is in the phrase, twice as good for half as much. There are also across many different like minority groups this idea of trying to either assimilate or perform like whiteness in a way that makes you more successful. And I think all of these things are really an attempt to make sure that what you're doing for your children is preparing them to succeed at a higher level than you are. And I think that it is understandable because the reality of the situation is that there are times where we do see this play out accurately. We saw it happen in Scandal in a number of ways. But also in real life it happens. I mean, there were times where I would like go to school or I'd get a grade and the assumption was that I was successful based on my race and my gender. The assumption was that I was an affirmative action case or something like that. And that literally was said. In my freshman year of college, an article was published in our school's paper where we had people demanding from the admissions office the records of these students of color who were admitted to the school. And I really appreciate the women who works in our admissions office, especially the Black women, who said no to this and really denied this access to people because, one, it's a way of protecting the students and showing us that they cared about us, but it also was a way of saying, like, not only are you wrong, but you're looking at the wrong demographic of people.
Exactly.
These are not people who are benefited beyond their actual skill set. These are folks who have achieved highly and can actually succeed in this environment. And we did, by and large. You know, it was, the success rate for us is much higher. But there's always this pressure and this assumption that we are not as good. And I've experienced that at pretty much every level of education, from middle school up. And I've also had moments where the assumption about me, I realize that the assumption about me has like worked its way into my understanding because I will go into a room determined to prove myself in a way that I don't know if everyone else feels. You know, I'll go into a room and be ready to like write notes to make sure that I'm saying something or make sure that I'm making a point that is not only coherent but profound so that I can exceed the expectations of folks around me. And it's something that happens all the time. And I think that it really is just this seed that's planted not to make us doubt ourselves, but to push us to be better than our parents. And it's really just a way of, I think, older generations trying to protect us in a way. But as a result comes like with the sacrifice of us having this self-doubt that we carry with us.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, actually, that sort of makes me think about something else. So, we'll get to that.
Okay.
So, so
Yeah.
This magic that Black girls have.
Yes, yes.
This pressure to perform that we have.
Yes.
That also makes for some outstanding performances.
It does.
When you write your notes so that you're going to say something profound, it's profound. I was in a meeting with you yesterday. It's profound. But there's a toll there. There's a cost.
Yeah.
And that cost is ours. You know? And so we know that this obviously contributes to things like depression and anxiety, but it also can create unfair and reinforce unrealistic expectations for folks too.
Absolutely.
And so, what kind of toll does this pressure put on Black girls and women in your experience?
It means that every Black woman that I've ever worked with has felt the need to be better than any job description she's ever read. You know, I remember being not only in law school but after I graduated and passed the bar. Having folks tell me to apply for things even if I didn't meet all the qualifications. And to me, that was ridiculous. Why would I do that? You know, I was applying for positions where I not only
everyone else does.
Exactly, and that's what everyone told me, that it was like the secret that no one talked about is that you apply for things regardless of your qualifications and just see how it goes.
Right.
And it's a very casual thing to say. I'll see how it goes.
Right.
And I have never met a job search with that kind of casualness. It's never been casual. And to me, it's like, when I'm applying for something, I want to exceed the expectations that folks have for that position. And as a result, I walk into interviews and people are like, why are you here? You know? And I'm met with this question. And then, of course, that makes me wonder, like, why am I here? Why did I think that this was the pinnacle of what I could achieve? Right? And it took a long time. It took a lot of conversations, including with you and a lot of other people, to encourage me to not only apply for things that I didn't necessarily check all the boxes for, but also when I applied for those things and got an interview, walk in there understanding that I am still overqualified for it, regardless of how many of those check boxes I could tick off. And it's a thing that I don't think that we're imbued with when we're younger. And it's funny because it's like a meme now where people say that they want to move through the world with the confidence of like a mediocre white man, right? It's a meme, it's a saying, it's a thing, but it's actually very real because I actually like gone through interview processes that included group interviews. And this is where I saw it manifest in the most like real and live action way. Okay, I sat next to somebody. I applied for a position that was for an attorney. And I sat next to someone who had not even gone to law school.
What?
And he had got called in for an interview because he was so confident in his application that it kind of conveyed to the people reviewing it.
Oh my goodness.
They were like, he seems so confident that it doesn't necessarily have to be something that you pass the bar to do. He has the confidence to go through and do this. And I sat there and I was like, not only do I have these degrees and these bar certifications, I have this debt. You know, like there's so many things that you have to think about when you're applying to things.
Wow.
And in that moment, I was like, oh, I see why people are telling me to apply for things that I might not feel qualified for, because this man, honestly, the confidence that he walked in with as well, like he came in a beautiful suit.
Oh my.
Ready to talk about all the things. His resume was printed on really lovely, heavy paper.
Well, yeah.
And I kind of sat there like, what was I thinking? Like, I am clearly overqualified for this position, and also I should be his boss. Like, it was in that moment where it kind of made things very solid for me that
that's funny.
There's almost, not even almost, there's a separate experience that we all come up with, and it takes other like lived experiences outside of our families, outside of our friend groups, to really understand and solidify just how different our lives are. And it manifests in different ways. Some of it is in like health disparities, but other parts are in like the wage gap.
Yes.
And so there's a whole dismantling process that's gonna have to happen for us to actually like make sure that young Black women are demanding what they deserve, and also ensuring that corporations, companies, nonprofits, the government, whatever, are valuing them at those price points. It makes no sense for us to have to work almost 9 more months to achieve the same amount as our white male colleagues. It doesn't make any sense, especially because we know that we're just as good.
Of course. And if you want, I mean, you know, when you have to experience oppression and still get to the same level that you would be at be it at this interview, at this law school, whatever this is, then oftentimes you had to overcome much more than to get that, you know. I don't want to say that's the thing that makes you overqualified, but I will say you're not underqualified.
Exactly.
You know? I could say that. We are short on time here, so let's so really quickly, sort of last thing, what makes a black girl? What makes Black Girls Magic, and why do we have it?
Oh man, Black Girl Magic is the spice of life that we kind of move through the world with, that we kind of are forced to have, but also that we kind of like tweak and make our own, you know? Like it's the swag that we carry with us that no one else can kind of put their finger on, but everyone can kind of see it regardless. Like you don't have the word for it, but you know it's there. And it's a thing that sometimes works for our benefit because we see each other and we spot it from across the room, across the street, whatever. And we kind of acknowledge it and nod at each other. But it also means that a lot of times it is a diamond, right? It is something that came through pressure. It is something that came through a lot of difficulty. And I think that's why it's so important to celebrate it too, because we are oftentimes like forced to deal with demands that are much stronger than anyone else experiences. But when we see each other flourish and bloom and all these things, we gotta celebrate it. We gotta shout it out.
I love it. I think that is such a wonderful definition, and it's also so important that it came through pressure. That it came through pressure, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
Thank you so much, Aisha. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Always.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. If you want to find out more about Affinity or the wage gap, go to our website, Affinity, affinity95.org. You can find out if you download right there. That would be our wage gap fact sheet. You can also figure out, you know, when we talk about what we need to do to end the wage gap, we have some list of things you can do there. But if you're in a position where you're hiring for folks, make sure that your job descriptions are asking for the level of education that you actually need. We know that disproportionately women, LGBTQ people, undocumented folks, people with disabilities do not have as much formal education. Is it imperative that you have this formal education? Is that what you're looking for? Maybe don't ask folks what their previous salary is. Decide what that salary is going to be for this position and hire someone that's worth that salary. If
in Illinois, you can't do it anymore anyway.
Exactly.
There it is.
Exactly. But when we wrote this, you could. So.
It's true.
But, yeah, so please check out our wage gap guide and find out a little bit more. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. We are here the fourth Friday of every month. If you have any topics of conversation or you'd ever like to join us and come on the show, definitely let us know. I am Imani. Imani, IMANI at affinity95.org. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aisha.
Yeah, it's great to be
Mom.
here.